Welcome to the Progression Health Podcast. I'm here with Dr. Will O'Connor. Will, do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. So I have a PhD in sports science, which centered around metabolic flexibility and ultra endurance performance. I guess maybe we'll get into that. And I'm a competitive runner. I'm focusing on ultra running. So that's around the 100K distance or around 80 miles for you Northern Hemisphere people. And how did I get into it? I guess like maybe some of your listeners will relate to this. At university, I played rugby. Like just a collegiate sport that was all about the team environment and drinking. And so like I drank a lot. Like I remember thinking, all right, if I can just hold down to 4 nights a week this week, I should be able to get on top of my work. Like that's, just enjoying being 18, 19. And then at the end of my first year of engineering, which I was studying, like I failed, which was a bit new for me. Like I was never the guy who got really good grades or was exceptional in anything, but I worked hard and just got the results that I needed to. And then reflecting on like not working hard enough and not getting results was like a bit of a slap in the face. So I was like, I want to do something different. And I was always jealous of my mates that had like national medals and they were getting trophies and ribbons from swim meets and all this. And as a rugby player, like unless your team wins, you don't get anything, regardless of how much work you put in. And I played at a good level. I trialed for a couple representative teams. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to try this like individual sport thing. It's kind of always intrigued me. I thought running sounds boring. I'll do triathlon. And I pretty much couldn't swim. I swam when I was like 12 years old and I was then like 19, 20. So for whatever reason, that was it. I started and I changed the topic that I was studying from engineering to biology because that interested me more, which turned into biochemistry, which turned into exercise science. I got better and better at triathlon. I tried to become a professional, moved to Australia and trained full time, burnt myself out, came back to do a PhD, did my PhD, picked up some athletes who wanted some coaching and advice, worked with the national triathlon team, and kind of started a business organically through that. And that's kind of been, I guess, the last 5 years, along with doing some research and some lecturing. And here we are.
Brilliant.
Quick snapshot.
Yeah, lots of interesting points to touch on. So yeah, the metabolic flexibility, I want to come back to that. But just going from being a rugby player to an endurance athlete, you kind of couldn't really go from one end of the spectrum to the other. So how did that come about? Like, how did you switch up? Because it's kind of like in rugby, I guess you're trying to hold weight or put on weight. And I see a lot of endurance athletes are almost doing the complete opposite. They're trying to be as light as possible. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yeah. So I guess I always enjoyed the fitness aspect of rugby training. Like I was always prided myself in being the fittest in the team. Like I would run to the gym and like I never knew, I don't know what you were like at school, what your kind of passion was, but going to the gym and fitness and health was definitely mine. But I had no idea what I was doing. Like I was trying to put on weight, but I was biking, like 6 miles to and from school. I was then running in the morning to the gym. Maybe I'd run to practice or bike home. And then I wasn't, I definitely wasn't eating enough. I got into protein, mass gainer, very crude kind of means of doing it. But so yeah, but I wasn't putting on weight. I was like the skinny white guy, as you'd say in the team. And so I played open side flanker. Some people may know what that is, but, and yes, I never held weight. I tried and was like religiously going to the gym, and the hard work never kind of worried me. And so, yeah, then transitioning to endurance sport, I didn't really know what it was about. So I didn't like I didn't care. I thought I was in amazing shape. So I remember this elite triathlete I was training with. So I ended up training with this really good group of guys that were all around the same age. And they were way better than me. And I remember saying something like, yeah, but I'm in good shape. Like, I'm ripped. And he's like, you're massive. Like, you're way too big to be a triathlete. It's like, what? What do you mean? Like, I'm like in great shape. And so I was probably 80 to 85 kilos. So would that be in pounds, like 180? Is it 190?
Yeah, somewhere around 180 to 190, right around there. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, and I needed to be probably, I guess, 200, 220 pounds. Like I need to get up to 90, 95 kgs. But that was I was just there, like I'd have to put in a big effort to get an extra 10. And so, yeah, as it turned out, I needed to put in a big effort to lose like an extra 10 to get down to say a 55, I guess, or, 150, 160 kind of area. But, so that wasn't until later that I got obsessed with diet and weight loss. In the transitionary phase, like I was still drinking a lot. Like I was still like 20 at university away from home. So I was just having a good time about it. And then I just started to progress and get better and better. And and then be like actually competitive, not just, like, whatever, a weekend warrior or something. And so that spurs you on to train more and learn. And then as I was going through my like education, I'm going from like first year to second year to third year of a degree, you start to learn some pretty intense stuff around how the human body operates. And so then I just started to experiment more on myself.
It reminded me of when I was younger, I first got into the gym and I was like, oh, I want to be ripped like a fitness model. So I got to go extreme. Obviously, where else would you go? There's like so many different paths I could have gone down, like to exhaust other options. But I was like, it's got to be a secret. It's got to be fat burners. And I can remember buying them. And the guy in the store is like, you don't need to use this. Like there's other things you can do, like that you probably haven't exhausted. But also the businessman in him is like, I'm not going to not sell it to you.
Yeah.
And I remember just going for, you have to do the low intensity cardio and all this kind of stuff. And it's just the hard lessons you learn when you don't know what you're doing, like you said.
Yeah. So I was taking creatine. And so that was good because you just load up on a lot of fluid, like yes, an extra like few pounds straight away. It's like honestly, pretty much just reading Men's Health magazine. Yeah. And just like, oh, that guy's ripped. I'll start doing that. If I could look back, hey, if anyone's listening out there and you want to put on a lot of weight, just start eating a ridiculous amount of food. Like there's no way I would have eaten for the amount of like being like a 16, 17-year-old, boy. Oh man, the amount of calories I must have been putting out. It's just insane. I should have been eating so much more, but here we are.
Yeah, we learned the hard way and then we can pass it on. So
yeah,
with the metabolic flexibility, then it's something I've heard about before. I don't know, something like the opposite that comes to mind is more common is insulin resistance, because the majority of the population in the world really would have an issue with that. So can you actually be metabolically flexible? How would you know you're metabolically flexible? What is it?
Okay, so I guess if I give a little lead in, a little background to what happened to me. So I'm on the Gold Coast training full time, doing a little bit of teaching, like lecturing at the university, and so I'm strict low fat. Like, I mean, I'm cutting the fat off bacon. I'm counting calories. I'm trying to get as light, as lean as possible. And I'm training, like we didn't have a car, so I'm biking everywhere, and I'm training like 25 hours, 30 hours a week. And that's like that's in the pool and out of the pool. That's not like doing warm-ups and stuff. A ridiculous amount. So in the first instance, like that was too much for me. I tried to do a professional load when I wasn't ready. But along with that, along with like overtraining myself, I was gaining weight, like, and gaining body fat. And I thought, oh, maybe I'm not being strict enough on my diet. I was definitely like, I love sugar, like chocolate, candy, just I can't get enough. And so sometimes, you'd have your cheat day or whatever, but I was riding for 5 hours and then doing like a 1 hour run, in one day. So trying to calorie restrict and expend ridiculous amount of calories in exercise obviously doesn't compute. And so I'd go through like these cycles of start to get in, because I was getting overtrained and I was becoming really tired and I was getting a hormonal imbalance from, systemic fatigue or like stress within the system. Also like barely had any money. So it's just like a worry on top of a worry. And then because I'm overtraining, some of my performances at races are inadequate or bad. So I wasn't earning any prize money. So that's like some more stress. And so then I'll go through these cyclic times of like binge eating, because I'm just so calorie depleted that they're just, I guess, in the evolutionary sense, like the reptilian brain, it's just like an overall drive to like eat food. Like you are so depleted. This needs to be rectified. And then I'm making bad choices because I'm so cooked, so it's like donuts and chocolate and ice cream or whatever. And then I feel bad about that. So, you go, so I get more restrictive, which is, piling bad habits on top of bad, trying to train. So anyway, that kind of went on, right? And then I was just like, what is happening? Like I'm training slower. I'm racing slower. I'm fatter. And then that was the time when Tim Noakes, have you heard of him?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Tim Noakes is coming out, this is 2012, on Twitter with all this low carb stuff. And I was like, this is weird. So I read up on it and I was like, this makes a lot of sense. And then, there's this powerlifter guy that I did my honors with, which I did before I went to Australia, and he was doing keto and he was doing the cyclic, I forget the author, the anabolic diet. You can look it up. There's like a free PDF out there. And so I think that's like 5 and 2. So 5, so you do your adaptive window of about 2 weeks, 14, 20 days of hugely restrictive carbohydrates. And then you go 5 days and 2 days, 2 days of eating whatever you want. Here's me coming from like a biochemistry, like fat equals fat gain. This is how it kind of works. And avoiding all fat. And this guy's just eating fat pretty much. I'm like, no way, your arteries are going to be absolutely clogged and this can't be healthy. And I remember telling my supervisor, he came into the lecture room. There's only like 10 of us doing the postgraduate. I was like, can you tell Scottish? That's what we called him because he was from Scotland. Can you tell Scottish he's going to kill himself eating, drinking this bottle of cream? And he's like, why? Like, why? How could it work? And I wasn't ready at the time to accept it, but Steve subsequently became my supervisor, and his PhD was on the effects of fasting on like not endurance performance, just sports performance, specifically around Ramadan, where they are only eating at when the sun's down. Sorry, I can't completely recall what the religious context is around that Ramadan, but so their national football team and all of that could not eat during, during the sunlight hours. So he was looking at the effects of that. So he knew all of this, right? And he knew and quizzed me on it, but I still didn't really accept why this was happening. So anyway, so I'd already kind of had a pre-learning, I guess, before Tim Noakes started talking about all this low carb stuff and this metabolic inflexibility and insulin resistance and, maximal fat oxidation rates and fat burning. And I always thought kind of like the more carbs you can burn, the better you'll be the more glycogen you can have, the better endurance athlete you'll be. And I think we'll touch on that later, because that's kind of where we've gone back to a little bit in the recent science of like sports supplementation during exercise. And I thought, I don't know, something just clicked in my head. So because like my dad eats a lot of fat, like he barely exercises, but he's not that big. Like he's a little overweight, but he's never that big. And I always thought, how can you eat bacon and eggs and like, you know, full cream this and heaps of butter on that and not be gaining more and more weight? It didn't really make sense. And so I got into it. I just was like, well, I'll do it. I'll stop eating carbs night and day. It was absolutely amazing. Like obviously there's responders and non-responders, and I just shed weight. Like fat was falling off of my body. I was going from like not seeing my abs, which was weird. I hadn't really, like, that's how much weight I was putting on. I actually thought the scales were wrong. I just started ignoring them because I was like, nah. And, weird mindset around that whole thing. And I just started feeling amazing. I was like, all right, there's something in this. And, went back to New Zealand to race the summer season. And, during that time, I was just keep researching on my own. And I thought, I don't think I'm keen to pursue being a professional athlete. I'm going to go back to university because I want to figure this out. And so went back, got to do my PhD there with my supervisor, Steve, and around this low carb thing. And I thought I was going to prove, right, that low carb is the ultimate diet for ultra endurance exercise. I was like, so I designed the study that was long-term adaptation. So not this 3 days, not this 1 week low carb, like 4 weeks of low carb or 4 weeks high carb crossover, and then a 5-hour time trial, like which we did in the lab, with 2-hour fasted fixed intensity measures. So I'll kind of get into that because I can see you kind of running it through your head. But anyway, so the main thing was like, I'm going to adapt someone for 4 weeks on a low carb diet, and then I'm going to test them over 5 hours. Like if optimal fat oxidation is ever going to perform optimally, like it is over 5 hours where carbohydrates are not really contributing, it's mostly aerobic, like you're most likely to burn fat. And so the least carbs you can burn early on, you can save for the end. And so as I was going through it, that's when I realized that, so the results really were that women responded, but men, it was, negligible, like between the performance, despite the fact that on a high carb diet, you're burning, significantly more carbohydrates, way more. Like I'd have to look at the numbers, but like, grams per minute more. But despite what diet you're eating, your body is, if you're trained, so I had trained endurance athletes, you had to be able to do a 5-hour time trial in the lab on a stationary bike, but you will be metabolically flexible enough to actually just, elicit the best performance out of yourself, physical performance, despite what fuel availability you have. And so that's the metabolic flexibility side of things, is where if you are a chronically high carbohydrate athlete, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you're doing 15 hours of exercise each week, there's going to be points in time in which you are carbohydrate depleted. You're going to do a 3-hour bike ride. Maybe you're going to do a 90-minute run after work, but you skipped lunch, or lunch just happened to be, for whatever reason, not trying, was low carb. Or you get up for your morning run and you do it fasted because you just always don't eat breakfast before you run. All of those instances add up to adding like a stimulus to burn fat over carbohydrate. So that's like, it's an adaptation. It's not maximal. It's not like specifically fasting and then exercising, or specifically reducing carbohydrate intake to a minimum while exercising. So you're really forcing the issue of needing to burn fat because there is no carbohydrate. It's just incrementally over time, over a year or months, you do force an adaptation. And so that when the time comes and you're exercising, carbohydrates available, you'll use it, but you won't use it, I guess, in an excessive manner that would mean that after 3 hours, you're completely depleted, compared to someone who has really forced fat oxidation, fat burning capacity to an absolute maximum. So at 3 hours, you may be burning more carbs as a carb eater and a high carb athlete compared to a low carb athlete. But actually, you're not burning so much that after 3 hours, you've got none left. And even if you did start to run low on your glycogen or your carbohydrate stores, you would actually start to increase your fat oxidation. So it's not like that capacity doesn't exist. That's the flexibility side of things. So when you eat low carb, or you really force this fat oxidation, fat burning capacity, this fasted exercise or just daily fasting, whatever you want to do, you do become more flexible, because then, like in a scenario where you start to maybe go to 10 hours of exercise, so we're talking like significant ultra endurance, Ironman, triathlons, that like ultra 50 miles, 80 mile, 100 mile ultra endurance. Now you start to be in a different scenario where you could be, for extended periods of time, you could have limited carbohydrate availability. And so then if you have a higher than average fat burning capacity, what that means is if you're running, I'll pull some numbers out here, but if you're running at 7-minute miles, right, and you have the ability to, that's your aerobic pace, and you can do that 100% off of fat or 99% off of fat, then when your carbohydrates are depleted because, you're between aid stations and whatever, you'll still be able to do that. But then if you're a high carb athlete and 7-minute miles your aerobic pace, that's still fine, but you run out of carbohydrates, your maximal fat oxidation pace may be 7:30, and so you'll be forced to slow down. And so, yeah, I guess I've spoken for a while. Where are you on this?
So I'm curious, there's so many things like, what did the elite, because my kind of focus is like half marathons and marathons. What do the elite like runners do? What are the kind of importance of individual preference? Because I always hear that's a big one, right? And then like, is there a clear winner between like, high carb or low carb? I guess I've thrown a few different questions at you there, but yeah.
So I guess if we go to the further you go down, I guess the exercising or athlete hierarchy, right? So you go elite, and then you go like competitive. I'd say I'm in that area. And then you start to go to like weekend warrior, someone who might be maybe 3 days a week. They can kind of quote unquote train for their triathlon or their half marathon or something, and maybe 4 days a week. And then you go down to someone who's starting out and they do a bit of running, or cycling or whatever, and 2 to 3 days a week. As you go down that, you're going down, I guess the stimulation or stress hierarchy. So like when you're training every single day as an elite athlete, twice a day, that's where it doesn't really matter what you eat, because you're just chronically stressing your muscle system, your whole physiological system, to be optimized, to be an optimal exercising machine. So if you're eating high carbs, you're still exercising 2 or 3 hours a day. So there's going to be plenty of opportunity to stimulate fat oxidation, fat release, suppress insulin. There's contractually stimulated glucose transporters. So that's a means of transporting glucose into your muscle cells without the need of insulin. So like all that's continuously happening at the elite level. As you go down, now you're getting to someone, let's go to the bottom, a couple of days a week, and you might have 2 or 3 days off exercise. You might be relatively sedentary for 3 days. Now you're not contractually stimulating anything. There is no stimulation to release any fat from your adipose tissue, like your stored body fat, to use as a muscle fuel. In actual fact, it's the reverse, right? It's like you're going to eat and you're going to need to store that energy. So you're going to store it as glycogen if it's carbohydrates, or you're going to store it as fat, whether it's carbohydrates like sugar or as actual fat. And obviously you're going to burn some, but you need to store that. And so as those 3 days compound on each other, you start to, I guess, be less efficient. You start to need to burn a lot of that carbohydrate because in high levels, like it's toxic, high blood sugar is toxic. So our body is trying to disperse and maintain a healthy blood sugar level, so we don't have these peaks and troughs and crashes. So now we start to rely on insulin a little bit, and insulin suppresses fat oxidation. It forces fat storage. And so that's kind of what we're stimulating. And then we do our exercise, and then we might have another couple of days off. So in that sense, we're not becoming metabolically flexible. So when you have that person, a low carb or a keto diet, or intermittent fasting is going to be like highly effective. For a lot of things we tested in the lab as sports scientists, the further down the kind of athlete hierarchy you are, the bigger effect things had, the bigger effect training intervention would have, a supplement would have. Where the further up you go to the elite level, as a finely tuned, highly optimized system, things like beetroot juice or nitric acid, like all these kind of different supplements, caffeine even, like they start to have there's a diminishing return because you're already so psychologically, physiologically optimized to perform over a task. Whereas the further down you go, these pre-workouts and all these different kind of supplements, they're going to have a far greater effect because the chronic adaptation to these different stimuli isn't there. So that was one of the questions.
Yeah, I get it. It's like an elite athlete's already maximized all of their kind of buckets for their potential. So there's not much more they can do to get better. They're only going to shave a couple of seconds off versus someone like me. I could train a lot more, or I could switch up my diet and go low carb, and I could improve a lot because I have so much more potential. As I said off air, the guy who won the most recent race is 20 minutes faster than me. So that's how much potential in theory I kind of have.
Yeah, right. And so like just by, in a running sense, like just by shedding a lot of weight and maintaining the same force production on the ground, so not losing, I guess, strength or muscle capacity, you'll run faster. You'll travel further each time your foot hits the ground if you can generate the same force. And now you're, without even training more, like just through losing weight, you become faster. And so, and then you add on to the fact that maybe becoming a little bit more metabolically flexible. So on your aerobic runs, you'd kind of 5 mile, 4 mile run. If you're not relying on carbohydrate at all because you become a bit more metabolically efficient and you're just relying on burning fat, there's a little less stress there, metabolic stress, from the potential production of acidic byproducts that carbohydrate metabolism can be associated with. And so on top of that, you may just be slightly faster through just I don't want to say a simple alteration to your diet, but just through altering your diet.
Yeah, a straightforward change that could produce huge benefit. That's good to know. And is that something that, like, as a coach, you know, would you kind of recommend someone try switching their diet up like that to try and get faster? Or, you know, how would you coach something like that?
Oh, so after being through being so attached to low carb, I guess, and the diet world, which during my PhD and a little bit after, I decided to just completely step away from that. So like I hardly ever talk about this kind of stuff, diet especially, because unless someone engages with me specifically about it as an athlete, I don't really want to get into it, because you've talked about diet and stuff with people. It's like a religion for people. They have really stern, hard beliefs. And I'd prefer to, like I said, for a lot of the clientele that I work with, similar to you, you know, it's similar to your listeners, probably a lot of working professionals. They just want to optimize their time. You know, there's family commitments, there's work, there's a lot of drivers, there's social things, there's travel. But they would love to absolutely just smash their marathon, their half marathon, their 10-mile, 10K. And it's like, I don't want to waste my time. How can I optimize that? And I think there's a lot of scope to optimize training, so that there's a consistent training improvement, so you can build week on week, month on month to then race well. And then to incorporate like a diet stress on top of that. It's like, and I don't know how you work with clients with diet advice and things, but it's open to interpretation. You know, you're like, okay, don't eat carbs, you know, let's put a line and say 100 grams a day or whatever. And then they're like, oh yeah, but this doesn't count. And then like, you know, I'll have bread, but it's not, I don't count it because it's Thursday. You know, and you're like, you're not gonna, it's too far. I just can't do it, you know? And so, but then some people find it on their own, you know, and so then they ask me for advice. What I'd prefer to give is like what you're asking me about. I'd like to give background science and advice on if someone was trying to pursue a low carb approach to exercise, that, how to go about that, you know, rather than saying, because they could be completely happy, right, with whatever diet they're doing. Typically everyone thinks that they're doing mostly the right thing, with a little bit of wrong things, and that's fine. And, but then to come in and say, hey, you need to try this, because like what I found during my research, women especially, they didn't like it. They did not like eating bacon and eggs cooked in butter for breakfast, or, you know, a coconut cream and cream smoothie. Yeah, there's a psychological component to it if you've traditionally eaten pretty low fat, to get over the fat equals fat kind of mindset. And so, yeah, so when someone's coming into it and they're saying, hey, look, I'm trying out this low carb, what would you recommend? Like my big recommendation is like fasted training is absolutely amazing. And your ultimate goal is to race well, right? Is typically you have a big goal. And, you know, for you like half marathon, you want to absolutely smash that. So your goal is to actually get on the start line and just be in the best shape you can be, really happy and healthy, so that whatever happens, you've had a good experience. And part of that is doing some really hard workouts. And those workouts, you need to optimize your effort and your performance within the workouts. So you can get the best stress possible, and most specific stress for your race. So you need carbohydrates. What I see a lot of time people do is they go, I'm going low carb. They get really good results within a couple of weeks. And they start to have a fear of carbohydrate. I definitely did. I was like, oh man, carbs equals, now it's like reverse, right? Carbs equals fat. And I wasn't getting enough carbohydrate to optimize the high intensity like training that I needed to do, because as soon as you start exercising around, I guess just a bit above, let's say a marathon pace, or if anyone knows kind of their thresholds, like their threshold pace, once you start getting close to that 95% and above, you need carbs. Like there's no two ways about it. There's no 100%. If you want to perform optimally kind of over any endurance distance, even ultra endurance, you need carbohydrate, because not every single muscle fiber within your legs or your arms or wherever is going to solely 100% rely on fat. There needs to be carbohydrate there. Even just like there's a saying, fat burns in the flame of carbohydrate. And that's, if you know biochemistry, it's the way acetyl-CoA feeds into oxaloacetate and it generates the TCA cycle. And so you need carbs to perform optimally. And so when you start having a fear of carbs, it deters from your ultimate goal, which is to race well.
In my sort of simplified version, it's like no person is 100% type 1 or type 2 fibers. And I know they're differentiated further, but type 1 is going to be carbs and type 2 is going to be fat. Or no, wait,
yeah.
It'll be, or maybe the other way around. But
other way around.
Other way around, yeah. So there's definitely, there's a whole lot of sense to what you're saying. So, and also the fear of carbs as well. It's not really sustainable long term, I would feel. And even with my own coaching, I used to try and do the exercise and nutrition. And I just realized I am so passionate about exercise. I don't really have the same passion for nutrition. It's also kind of religious at times. And you can get so much out of exercise on its own. A lot of the times I feel like nutrition can, for the most part, not 100% of the time, but it can look after itself once you get the exercise right. So that's a similar kind of conclusion I have. So
it's like eat well, like everyone knows, no one thinks Coca-Cola is good for them. No one thinks eating chocolate and going to McDonald's is good. We know what's good. So it's like, stop eating all of the junk and if you're exercising, you'll be fine.
Yeah. It's like, I feel like the more we put into nutrition, or I'll speak for myself, the more I put into nutrition, the more I kind of focus on it and get more like kind of restrictive. Whereas the more I put into exercise within reason, the more it gives back to me. Because with exercise, it could be walking, it could be swimming, it could be, there's so many different ways I could go about it. I could even do yoga and call that exercise. So it's like, there's a lot more bang for my buck with exercise. And it's just more cost effective for my mental energy.
Yeah. So I have another podcast, or I have a couple, but one that I do with another sports scientist that I did my PhD with. We talked about the energy availability theory, and this is a big one. This is, if you follow any kind of triathlon, the Norwegians are smashing it, right?
I saw, on Rich Roll's podcast, the two guys are like,
So half Ironman world champion, Olympic champion, Olympic distance world champion, World Series champion, like everything. They're just winning. And one of their big things is the volume of training they do consistently, like throughout the year. And the bigger guys, like traditionally, than we would otherwise, than you normally see. And all they focus on is training. Like their diet is how much energy can we get in to figure out how much energy we can expend, because the more energy you can expend in a day, the more training you can do, the more adaptation you can get. So they're trying to find the balance of like, if I eat another 1,000 calories, can I do another hour of training? It's kind of like that. And so they've really flipped it on its head, or kind of opened up this other opportunity where you go, actually, if I eat more, what do I feel like? Like, am I recovering more? Like, am I able to is that 45 minutes now becoming 60 minutes without actually, being that bad? Am I sleeping a little bit better? And that's definitely what I've found with a lot of the busy professionals. There's a guy I recently had now I said I don't really help diet, but he said, I'm losing weight, and he didn't want to. He's trying to do a fast 5K, and he otherwise does CrossFit. And he's just looking to be holistically healthy. So I'm losing weight. I don't want to. So I said, but he's in finance. He's a big wig. And I said, send me your average diet, your daily food, what you're eating, nothing intense. He's like, I don't want a diet plan or anything. I said, just send that to me, and he's in like 800 calories less than he needs to. And, for him who's busy and he's already eating 3 meals, and it's like 800 calories is kind of hard to find. So I said, look, try this mass gainer shake. It's got like 500 calories in it, and then just make sure you have another piece of toast at 3 p.m., whatever. So post exercise, have this really calorie dense. You could put some, MCT oil or some coconut oil, things like that to bolster it. And a lot of the time that's what's happening. You've got kids running around, and so you have some breakfast, but oftentimes, like, without a significant fat source within your breakfast, you're only getting 300 to 500 calories. And if you're a exercising male around that 160, 180 pounds, you're probably expending 2,500 to 3,000 a day. And so then you're only getting 300 or 500 for breakfast, and you get 500 for lunch, maybe a bit more. Maybe you didn't have time for a proper lunch. Then you have like maybe 800 for dinner, and then you're like still hungry, obviously, because you're like only at 1,800 and you're supposed to be at 2,500. And so trying to eat more and getting a healthy fat source within your diet, so making sure you have butter on your toast or whatever it is, can often lead to a better, like, day-to-day feeling and energy, like you're saying, like mental energy. Because when you start to look at your diet intensely, I'm the same as you, right? You start to be more restrictive and saying no a lot. And then it's just another thing. Like, we have so much stuff going on in our lives. It's like to try and say no to try and just add diet stress on top of that is like rough. Unless you're starting to build like really bad habits, which you can cut out. Like, that's different than being ultimately restrictive on different aspects.
So then, just with kind of like body weight, nutrition, training, would you have to have a sense of what, and maybe even a second opinion of what an ideal weight to perform at is? So then you could say, right, I want to hold it, I want to add, more calories to get more weight. I want to, would you require that in the first place, or how would you figure that out?
Well, yeah, I'm not big on the weight thing. Like, so take your shirt off and have a look in the mirror. I think that's like, if you have a look in the mirror and you can tell, if you can't see your muscle definition, then you're carrying too much fat, unless you're like a power lifter or someone who needs mass moves mass. So you're a sumo wrestler or whatever. But it's relatively easy to determine if you're carrying excess fat. I think we all know if we are or not. And so so you need to lose fat. I mean, there's healthy amounts of fat as well, but if you're specifically looking to perform better, then reducing your excess body mass that is non-functional, so that would be body fat, is going to allow you to perform better. You're able to move more efficiently and more effectively. You're not expending unnecessary energy carrying like non-functional body mass around. But then I would have no idea what that would be, right? You can't, you can do body composition scans to figure out how much body mass, but you still don't know. You could lose 5 pounds of body fat and that would be enough. Then you'd see all your definition. You're like, I can't really lose more than this, or I'd start to be losing too much. But then you could be side by side with your twin who has the same amount of body fat, or at least, looks like it and everything. And they could lose 10 pounds of body fat and then be ripped and feeling, seeing their definition and feeling optimal. But what that number is, like, we don't know. So yeah, it's hard because I have a mate that I run with. He's significantly faster than me. So he runs like a 220 marathon So he's like elite, and to standing side by side, we look very similar. We're about 6'2", and so he's 5 kgs, so that would be like 10, 12 pounds lighter than me. And I have no idea where it is. Like, I have no idea how I'm carrying that much more mass than him when, like, he's a builder, like a laborer. So he appears like a bit more muscular than I do, which would be the heavier component of anything. So I guess I have a much heavier skeletal system than him. But, so am I, like, I've never been his weight. I've never gotten that light before, despite like really trying. So you can't really say, oh yeah, you're 6'2" and a runner, you should be 140 pounds. It's like, well, I can't. Like, I'd be injured for sure. I'd have no energy. I'd have to really significantly restrict my diet to a level that I'm not willing to, or probably don't have the capacity to. And so, but what I can do, and what I would recommend along that question would be, you can adopt a healthy lifestyle, and that's going to lead to, like, when you know you're not having ice cream after dinner, you're adding an additional protein source to your dinner, so you're not worrying about being hungry later on. When you're doing all those things, I don't think you really get worried about your weight as much. You go, oh, I feel amazing, and the weight has to come off, because if it's not, then something else in your life is causing the hormonal imbalance, the excess stress, which can cause some people to hold weight in like a kind of a stress response. Like, that would have happened if we were, fearing an oncoming famine or mass migration to like a more prosperous location, as hundreds of thousands of years ago. And some people may lose weight, but if you're waking up at 5 a.m, dealing with the kids, dropping at school, kindy, going to work stressful, getting the kids, getting dinners ready, then going on the rower, getting on the treadmill, then checking some emails and going to bed, that's unhealthy. That's high stress environment. And it's going to be hard to maximally adapt physiologically to kind of anything. Like, you compare that to an elite athlete who wakes up, goes training, comes back, has the proper food, literally chills out, checks some emails, doesn't have any impending like necessary thing to do except for get ready for the next training session. That's the dude who's 20 minutes ahead of you. You compare your lifestyle to his, even if you could do the same training, he's not like sending me these emails and writing up this description I'm looking at for the podcast and these line of questions. And, there's not that level of, and all your clients and the business you run, like you're going to really struggle to adapt if you don't shut out everything. So then trying to be like, oh yeah, I should be 153 pounds. It's a very specific number.
So it's kind of like, to consider your performance and how to improve it, you also have to be very realistic with the demands in your life and kind of see like where it's realistic to make a change and try and reach your potential and where it's not. Is that like something you would kind of think of as a coach?
Like, you need to have realistic expectations. So when I started, like when I was doing this like 30 hours of training, I had this unrealistic expectation of myself of like, I'm ready to be a professional, but I wasn't. Like, and so when someone comes to me and they go, oh, I want to run a sub 3 hour marathon. And so I have a popular podcast episode, how to run a sub 3 hour marathon, the numbers and the workouts, right? And I go through the numbers and the workouts. Like, if you can't do these kind of numbers and these workouts, there's 99% chance through my experience that you're not going to be able to do a sub 3 hour marathon. And so what I see often especially in half marathon running, is runners picking these arbitrary times. And the only kind of real quote unquote data they have to back it up is one, a desire to do the time. Their training mate that they've gone for a few runs with who did that time last year, and maybe something they did at college or something they did 5 years ago, or their office buddy who did this time. Hardly ever is it like associated with the specific numbers, right? And weight is often the same thing where you're like, this is the number. It's like your salary or like earning or like your car. It's like, we bought a new car recently. It was like, this is the number. All right, we're not spending more than this, but you also kind of fix yourself. I'm not spending less than this either. Kind of like, what can we get for this number? It's the same kind of thing, or it's not really realistic. It's like, and it takes a lot of maturity, I think, through the like finding yourself as a quote unquote athlete or just someone who's as a training individual, to be comfortable in going, why don't I find out what my number is? Yeah. Because I always used to chase the lower number, right? And then I realized actually I'm running well, right? I'm training well and I'm improving. And actually that is the goal, not this, like not 73 kilos. That doesn't really mean anything if I'm injured.
Yeah. You're reminding me of, in the fitness industry, a lot of people are like, oh, the result is to get like the abs, to like look healthy or to look lean. And it's like, no, I think the real aim is to feel healthy. And it's like, the time is great. If you're making me think of my own training, it's like, if I could hit a PR in my next half marathon, great. But it's kind of like, I'd much prefer to like be able to kind of just show up and have like a real good block of training and be like, happy with the consistency and not be injured, not be burnt out, because there's so much more in that. A PR is great, but it can be kind of hollow because all the side effects that can come with it of, injuries or burnout and stuff like that, like the burnout you mentioned from when you were trying to be a triathlete. So yeah, it's a really good point.
I've been on that roller coaster, man. And I just had a really good month where I did a marathon and I got a PR. And then I did a 1 mile road race, a 5K road race, and 100K, and in 1 month, right? And so, like, I did a 2:37 marathon. I ran 16 minutes for 5K, just over 4 minutes for a mile, and then I ran 100K, came third, did 8.5 hours, and like, I took the expectation off of myself. Right, through the whole process and I spoke to my wife about this. It's like, I'm just going to enjoy this. And man, did I enjoy it. Like, it was just so much fun. I had a really good experience, right? And my last marathon, I put so much emphasis on the time, right? It was like, I had trained, I enjoyed the process of the training, but each training I was like chasing that time. Like just to try and get down to like the low 230s. And so I happened in the race. So I still ran 2:39, but in the race, there's this point, I wrote about it on my blog, did a podcast on it as well. I made this real bad decision, right? So I saw my heart rate, and I knew my feeling, but I was on my time. So I just, in the moment, neglected the ultimate goal, right, was to race. And I would have got a PR, I'm sure, but instead I blew out, right? I kept chasing and then had this horrible experience over the last 6 miles, right? Maybe even 10 miles, just grinding it out and finishing in a time that was like, I know I can do that time. It was like, what did I get out of this? Like, out of all that hard work, I just got this empty feeling. Whereas a couple of weeks beforehand in the lead-in, I did the half marathon national champs, and being a data guy, like #faster with data is like my thing, right? And I took my watch off. I raced a half marathon without a watch because no data, right? Because I didn't want the pressure it was for training, and I wanted to feel in myself how I needed to feel around a race. Done plenty of half marathons. I know what I can do. And I had so much fun. Like we got into the hill, and because it was a hilly course, I knew it was going to be slower. So I just didn't want to get attached to the time. And it was national champs, so it was good field. So we were like racing, and so I was like, I'm going to wait here, and then I'm going to like push on the downhill. And it was so much fun. So much fun. I like finishing on a real high compared to, like if I had been like, I need to run like a 1:15 to get a 2:30, whatever. I ended up running, I think I did run 1:15, 1:16. My PB is like 1:13, so it's like 3 minutes off, but it's like, I didn't even care. Like the time had no attachment to my goal, which was to enjoy and feel the race. And, but then, many times I've been attached to the time and made poor choices in training to chase the workout. Like I have to do this to equal this many miles a week equals this level of time, and anything less is going to be a lesser performance. But trying to allow yourself to trust that process. And like you're saying, like if you really have your goal for your half marathon, it's like, it's a block headwind point to point course, you're not going to do it. And so it just becomes a little hollow, and what do you do in that scenario? Do you run as fast as you need to at the start and then slow down, like because you can't run that fast into a headwind? Or do you go, all right, well, let's see what I'm going to, just look at my heart rate and make sure my goal is to run each 5K segment, each quarter faster. You can have all these different challenges, and when you complete that, you'll be really stoked, regardless of what the time is.
So I've heard recently, if you like the last podcast I had, and actually just saw it on Twitter, it's all about enjoyment. Like that's a real big part of, any endeavor really. And it's kind of like you're or anyone would be setting themselves up for failure if it's just about the PR, because number one, you can only PR so many times. And number two, there's like, with enjoyment, there's so many different ways that it could be enjoyable that you're kind of sucking that out of it straight away by only focusing on the PR. So it makes so much more out of the event by focusing on the enjoyment. And that's actually something that I tried before that I've gotten away from. So I want to get back to that for my next one. So
you'll always go away from it. It's like diet, right? It's like going to bed early. Like you'll always just stray away because it's easier to get attached to the shiny new thing, which is the PR, right? And it's a balancing act as well, because like you want that motivation. You don't, unless depends why you're doing it is a different thing. But I always want to run faster. Like it's just what really motivates me. And so the 2:30 barrier for a marathon is very attractive, or like the 15-minute barrier for 5K. Like those are real big goals of mine. But it's just knowing like that I'm going to try to achieve that. That's like a motivator, but it's not the goal. The goal is to like have fun. Yeah. And because when I first broke 2:40 in the marathon, I was just writing a blog about it. And I remember going through halfway and we were like 1:19:48, right? So like 12, I needed to go through it at 1:20, and so like 12 seconds ahead. The guy I was running with, he goes, cool, we just need to do that again. And I was like, no way, I'm hurting here. Like, and that again, no way. I was like, well, we'll just keep working together and I'll just, try. I just keep trying because I want it. I want this sub 2:40. And so then, it started to really hurt. Those last kind of few miles, was looking at my watch and I was like, I can do this. Like, I can do it. I can do it. And it just spurred me on through that grinding pain of like your being saying, slow down, like stop. Your life will be so much better if you stop, and just being like, actually, I can, this goal I've been really hunting for, I can achieve it if I don't stop or don't slow down. So in that sense, it's like I let go of the goal early, right? I was just running. I was running on feel and making sure I keep an eye on my time. But overall, I was enjoying the process of being out there racing. And then when it came down to it, I kind of attached to the goal, which then motivated me to run faster and push more than I otherwise would have if I had fully just detached and gone, let's see what happens. Then I would have been in the pain and been like, wow, I'm running well, so it doesn't really matter. But having that time, but it's a difficult one, yeah, because like just last year, I attached to the outcome too early and neglected all these signs that I know time and time again is telling me to slow down.
So it really depends on the situation. I think like you have to pick your spots of when you focus on the PR or the goal, and when you're going to focus on the process or the enjoyment. It's kind of like an experience thing.
Yeah, because like you're going to, the way I like to run training is like you do these kind of benchmark workouts. So let's just say you do a 10K time trial. Like for me, I'm going to be pretty aware of what your capacity is for a half marathon. So you can say, hey, look, you could be on for a 125 here. Like this is a realistic goal for you, but it's going to, it might not be on. Depends on the course, depends on what day you're having. So whereas like a 120, it's like, no, don't. So you can have I knew a 240 was on for me. It was within my capabilities. Whether I was going to have that day or not, hard to say. So you can kind of set that. You want to be able to have that realistic time point. And so then you can get into the race and then you can go, yeah, it's that block headwind, or it's raining and there's lots of surface water. So it's like, that's not the day. That's not, now it's definitely that time goal is not, I'm running, like I'm trying to hit those splits, but I'm not hitting them. So it's switching focus. It's having that, I guess, that mental flexibility as opposed to metabolic flexibility to play around with that. And if you take a step back like that, the hard part, I don't know how you find it, but it's like in training, you could be really tired, or like, it's not a good idea to go for your run. Like you think, oh, I need, it's like one session out of this next 14-day block. You won't, like in a week's time, you won't even look back and be like, oh, I missed that. I missed that 10-mile run. Now I can't. Now I'm fat and unfit, It's trying to enjoy that process of knowing, of being tired and needing to take a day off, and all the way leading up to, the end goal. But, for your listeners and yourself, it's like, and me, we're not those personalities. We're the like hard work gets results. So the fact that I'm thinking I shouldn't do this is a sign that I should do it.
That doubt in my head is the doubt that I need to overcome. It's like I'm working against that doubt, and it's probably undoing a lot of good work, or a rest day, like you said, one in 14 weeks isn't going to make a huge difference. But just kind of going back to the actual running itself and the zones. So one of your posts you had about the training zones, and I feel like people are blue in the face talking about just, zone two. And that's all I hear. And I even hear people who, like, no disrespect, but they're not like experienced runners talking about zone 2, and I'm just like, is it really that simple? Like, can you kind of give us a little bit of your experience on the all the zones, and is zone 2 the best?
Oh, the old zone 2. Yeah, it's really taken off. So I guess when we're talking about training zones, what we're trying to do is we're trying to, as coaches or practitioners, physiologists, sports science, whatever, we're trying to convey a common language between a coach and an athlete. So in terms of prescription sense. So rather than me saying, okay, 7:15 per mile to you, and then I'm going to say a 6:15 mile, and then I'm going to say a 9-minute mile to that person over there. And what I'm trying, or I can say, right, easy, or easy moderate, and as so I say zone 2. Okay. And I'm going to base that off of your threshold, your anaerobic threshold. So you go, okay, cool. I've got kind of objective numbers where I'm looking, and for you it's 7:15, for me it's 6:30, for that lady it's 8, but it's all, let's say, 75% of your threshold. So for everyone, it's like that becomes like a common prescriptive term. Like, oh, okay, I can say, have 10 people in front of me, and we're like all going to go do a zone 2 run, and we can all do it at a different pace, and it's all going to have the same kind of effect, I guess, or like it's training the same kind of, we're chasing the same kind of stimulation through that. So when we have the zones, we have, that's why we have them, right? So we can get this kind of common language between practitioner and client athlete to be able to describe an intensity in a relative term. So rather than being like easy, moderate, hard, sprint or whatever, it's like, here's some actual numbers that we can utilize that's going to be commonplace. Then, so that's like the basis for training zones. Then we get into like the actual calculation of training zones, and that's where everyone's lost. Right. So there's, I guess, at the fundamental level, metabolically, there's 3. There's kind of like your 100% aerobic, which is what we've talked about, where you're using oxygen and fat, maybe a little bit of carbohydrate, oxygen and fat to generate ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy currency of the cell. So we need that ATP to generate muscular contractions. So like oxygen, fat, cool. And then beyond that, we start to enter into the anaerobic metabolism, and we have this mid-ground where we have a little bit of anaerobic metabolism, just, so let's say like marathon intensity. Maybe you've got, you're starting to burn a little bit of carbohydrates without oxygen, because we need energy we need that ATP a bit quicker, faster than what fat or the oxidative pathway is going to generate it. And so then there's a bandwidth in there where we have a little bit, let's say like 1%, 2% anaerobic metabolism, all the way up to 99%. So we have that window in there, which is kind of like your marathon, half marathon running intensity. Then beyond that, so that's called moderate. So we have easy, zone 2, moderate, and then zone 3 is severe. And so that is when we are now 100%, or almost 100% anaerobic. So we're pretty much without oxygen. Majority of the ATP production is done without oxygen. So now you're looking at all the way to like, I guess like sprinting and a 1,500 or 1 mile race. And so we kind of actually really only have those. It's like that. If you were taking a lactate test, you'd have lactate threshold 1, which is the initial onset of blood lactate, and then the lactate turn point at which lactate accumulation is uncontrolled and rapid, non-steady state exercise. So actually we only have those 3. But that's really hard as a prescriptive thing to say zone 2 when actually that's like completely opposite to what everyone else is talking about. So in a scientific realm, I see a lot of pure sports scientists who maybe aren't everyday coaches or work with like the common ground of athlete, would maybe describe it like that, and which is almost completely disassociated with what the population base uses zones. So that's confusing. And then most people are going to use between a 5-zone and a 7-zone system. But regardless, both 5 zones or 7 zones, the zone 1 and zone 2 are going to be below that point of blood lactate accumulation. So that that point at which anaerobic metabolism starts to enter into your intensity. So that would be slower than marathon pace for a lot of people. And the reason that I guess that's a term to the gold standard exercise intensity is it sits within the bell curve of high stimulus. You know, you're still running at a relatively steady intensity, but low stress. And so what you're doing is you're stimulating exactly what you want out of building endurance in terms of your oxygen and fat metabolism within the mitochondria, so you can upregulate fat like release from and transport from adipose tissue to your muscle, fat transporters within the muscle, and actual generation of new mitochondria, so you can burn more fat faster, more ATP, more muscular contractions, faster running. So that whole process. And so the more of that you can do, the more chronic kind of stress you'll get on that specific system, and the better the adaptation. And then, because once we start going above that, it starts to get into murky waters, I guess we'll say.
My takeaway is just to train with, it's so reductionistic, but train with a plan. So not to go out and just think that like, because I get into like zone 5, it's like a better workout. It's
so the big trap with zone 2, for a lot of people you're saying who kind of potentially have no idea and are talking about zone 2, is they will use average heart rate often as the reference point. So what I see there is what's often termed gray zone training, where, like I said, you don't have a plan, but like you should train kind of easy, but you don't want to train easy because that's not why we're doing it, mental strength, hard stuff. And so you go, okay, you do a calculator, online calculator, maybe Garmin gives it to you, whatever watch, your Whoop, or whatever, is like, oh yeah, this is your zone 2. Cool. 150 beats. So you go out, you're obviously warming up. It's 120, 130, 140. Then you run up a hill, 160, you run down the hill, it's 145. You push, and then you want to like kick on a little bit at the end. It gets up to like 165, 167. You have a look, average heart rate, cool, 150, 149. That's exactly what I needed. But actually you just like did this random non-specific kind of intensive training session that is going to elicit like relatively large amount of fatigue with relatively less specific stimulation of like the aerobic system. And that's where you get into gray zone. And that's where I see the big mistake in zone 2 training is people just still not doing it easy enough.
The hard thing is just keeping it easy. It's a lot more, I don't know, is it just that it's like a shiny object syndrome, or it just seems more intense and that seems better. But yeah, something you did mention is lactate threshold and then running power. So, what are they? Are they kind of more intermediate considerations, or, when is it an effective time to start considering stuff like that?
So the lactate threshold is ambiguous term used for kind of what I reference the lactate threshold as for someone who's not specifically using a lactate meter, is that point of diminishing returns, right? So it's like that red line. Okay, you go above this line, it's your time above this line, this pace, this power, this heart rate is limited. So we need to be careful around that. Like, that's not going to be marathon pace for you. And from that, based off of the collective world of data that we have, we know certain percentages of what you can sustain. So you go out, often it's like a 30-minute test, or like what you can use for your recent run, which is about an hour. It's perfect. You can take the last 20 minutes of that, and that's pretty much going to be your maximal sustainable pace, or threshold pace, which is kind of what you can maximally sustain for like an hour, maybe a bit longer, depends on how well you're trained. And then based off of the massive data we have, we know like that 90% of that is going to be around your marathon pace. 95% of that's probably going to be around your half marathon pace, and below 90% is kind of that aerobic sustainable pace, that zone 2, right? That 80 to 90% is going to be your aerobic pace. And so that's where, once we have that metabolic reference point, you can't kind of cheat that. You can't, like, I know how fast you ran for whatever it was, like 58 minutes. There's no world in which you run 5 minutes quicker this week. It's like, and especially when we're looking at heart rate, once you've set your threshold heart rate, it's not real. Like, if you're well trained enough, like you are, like, it's not really going to change how fast you run relative to that heart rate. So your 150 beats, maybe it was 7:30 a mile, then it becomes 7 a mile. 150 is still your zone 2. That's still the reference point for your training intensity. So that's kind of the threshold reference question, I think.
Yeah. And your post then that you actually had on your channel, YouTube channel, is about running power. Is another term I've seen. So it's almost like running's becoming more complicated. So yeah, what is running power, and is it something to consider for, someone running half marathons?
Okay, so running power has been recently more complicated in the running sphere, because Garmin integrated running power on the wrist. And so so initially we just had the Stride running power meter, which is a third-party device that initially was in the heart rate strap, and then subsequently now it's like a shoe clips onto your laces. And then Garmin kind of always had it in their heart rate strap, but you had to kind of activate it. And so most people didn't really know it was there. But then with the introduction of running power onto the wrist for Apple Watch and Garmin, Chorus and Polar and other devices do them as well, but Garmin and Apple being the big players in the space, people are starting to go, oh, what is this? Like, how does this work? And what does it all mean? So I guess simplistically, it's a means of energy expenditure over time, right? And so the best analogy or like way to think about it is, if you're running on the flat and you're running your 7-minute mile, it's that's a real 7-minute mile. And so however much power, 300 watts is requiring you, so that's energy over time, like that's 300 watts. Now you get to your hill and you got to run up the hill. You try and run your 7-minute mile, that's no longer equivalent to a 7-minute mile. Like, the amount of increased force production, so the increased energy you have to put out to maintain a 7-minute mile up a hill against gravity, is now going to, rather than 300 watts, it's going to be 400 watts, because you're increasing the amount of energy you're outputting over time. So when we have running power, we have a means of normalizing your effort. Grade adjusted pace, GAP. Yeah, so grade adjusted pace it's adjusting your pace based off of the grade. So it said, like, You run this really hilly run and you got your 7-minute mile, and then grade adjusted pace will say that's equivalent to a 6:30. Because what it's saying is, if this was flat, your hilly course was flat, and you ran this effort, it would equate to this faster pace. And power is doing exactly that. It's saying, so you can go do your 5K run and you can average 300 watts. And so we know like that's going to be your best effort over 20 odd minutes. So you go do that on an uphill, right? And you can go, well, obviously running 5Ks uphill, that took you 27 minutes, but you average the exact same or slightly less because you're going a bit longer. You average like, say, 290 watts. You go, oh, well, that's equivalent. That's an equivalent effort. So you're going to get the equivalent amount of stress and stimulus out of that uphill effort as you did to your like 5K all out. So then when we start to think about exercise prescription and we start to think about pacing within a race, we can get a potentially more accurate representation of the amount of work we're doing. So you may want to run your 125, your 130, 140 half marathon, and in training, you've been training, you're like, yeah, cool. I'm allowed, rather than saying I'm allowed to run 7:15s, you can say I'm allowed to run 280 to 300 watts. That's about my range that I can sustain. So then that's again helping with that like end outcome thing. So when you get to a hill, you're not guessing, you're not chasing a 7:15, you're not guessing it's like a 7:30, you're running 280 to 300 watts. Maybe you're allowed 300 on the hills and it's 280 on the flats, whatever. But so in that sense, you are potentially getting a more accurate means of pacing yourself and like your point-to-point kind of energy distribution. Then in saying that, there's the measurement. And how accurate is it? Hard to say. Like the foot pods are amazing. I use the Stride foot pod, and I would consider that kind of the gold standard. It's the one thing that device is trying to do is interpret your energy output. When you have it on your wrist, like as in the modern Garmin's and Apple Watch, there's a lot of noise that's happening there. Obviously your arms moving around. It's relying on GPS signal, which is getting better with multi-band GPS. But it's still relying on a couple of external inputs to try and predict the power output, because you've got to keep in mind it's got to have a barometer in it so it can measure the pressure, the outside like atmospheric pressure, so it knows that the change in gradient's happening. And so yeah, I've seen it to be a bit noisy on the watch. And so I don't use that as a fundamental, like a primary metric for people who are using just wrist base. It's still good, but yeah, for a lot of people, it's another thing that can be pretty challenging to get your head around.
Yeah, definitely it is. And it's new as well. So I think like people wouldn't be as familiar with it. If you were to kind of simplify it for the listeners, what would you say is one, or maybe even there's a combination of things to kind of measure or look at with your training to have like a good feel of, fast, slow, different paces and stuff like that?
So pretty much up to marathon pace, I use heart rate. All right. So if you're going for an easy run, you need to be running easy. You need to minimize the stress on the whole system. So real slow, like pick a pace that's like really slow. And then you can use heart rate, because if you are really, really stressed and say you've just done a race, you've just done your race. If you tried to run the next day, you might be running really slow, but your heart rate might still be pretty high. So you've got to go slower than that. Then zone 2, for sure. A lot of the time, no one lives in a dead flat area with like pristine temperature and humidity. I've got a local forest that has endless amounts of trails through it. So on gravel roads, I'm on trail. I can't look at pace. If I was trying to chase a zone 2 pace, I'd be just smashing myself up the hills and then relaxing on the downs. So heart rate is going to be the best for zone 1, zone 2. And then you get into marathon. Again, within training, marathon intensity can vary a lot. If you're in week 3 of like a 3-week block, maybe you're going to be 10 to 15 seconds off per mile off of your like goal pace. So heart rate can be more reliable for anything steady state. Once we start getting into half marathon intensity, so for me, I would consider that zone 1, 2, 3. Then we start getting into zone 4, 5, and then 6 or 7 if you're using those. That half marathon intensity, I like to use pace for that, or power if the athlete's familiar with power. But at this stage, I'll give you some advice on that in a sec. But that's when you start to use pace. You go, okay, so now around that threshold area, 95% and up, heart rate can be kind of variable. So what I see a lot is, let's say you had a couple of beers with the boys the night before, and then you didn't have any water before you went to bed, and you're getting up. You didn't get drunk or anything, but you're slightly dehydrated, and so you get in 30 minutes into like an hour and a half, hour 45 workout. Your heart rate's going to maybe jump up a little bit, maybe 5 beats higher because you've sweated out a bit, and you don't have the same like blood volume normally. And so I can see those workouts not being as effective if you rely on heart rate, because sometimes it can be, you're like, oh, heart rate's really high, I better slow down. And now you're just kind of running too slow to get the actual muscle biomechanical stimulus. So I like to use pace for kind of half marathon intensity and up. And even marathon sometimes, depending on what you're like, if you have a time goal and the course is pretty flat, you got to kind of run the pace, a little bit, but mostly that's the goal. And then if you're doing 10K, 5K, like let's lock it in. Like you want to run a 40-minute, 45-minute, like you got to run the splits. And so you got to see if that's realistic. And then what I'd recommend, if people have running power access to it, is then start to look like when you're doing your zone 2 run, or you're doing your steady effort, your tempo effort, your zone 3 kind of effort, have a look at what your power is. Just have it on your watch screen, so have your heart rate, have your pace, have your power, time and distance. That's kind of what I have on my screen. Right, primarily looking at heart rate for most of my runs. But then I can keep an eye on, so running on the flat and I'm running at 150 beats, zone 2 kind of thing, be like, okay, 280 watts. All right, so that's interesting. And then you can start to get a gauge of like when you're running up a hill and you start to run at 310 watts, it just, yeah. And just through that, as the world of knowledge progresses and the actual metric itself progresses, you'll at least be kind of on top of it. And then for those data geeks, you can just keep going.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I'll keep it simple for now with the heart rate and the pace, and just start to dabble a little bit in the wattage, so I won't overwhelm myself. I think that's a very easy thing to do. But
yeah, so the easiest thing I think is like when I've because you're following one of my plans like for your running, it's like when you have hill repeats, you just go, okay, I'll just try and make sure try and figure out what your power might need to be and see if you can try and keep it constant. You're like, okay, well, these are kind of threshold hill repeats, so I should be running, around say 645. And so then you can kind of have a look and at your power when you're running 645. Okay, all right, let's see if I can hit 350 watts for these hill repeats. That's a good way to go about it. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, hills definitely something I'll encounter here in San Francisco with the way the city is. But Will, this has been great. Thanks so much for all your time. Is there any kind of final message you want to leave people with, or links or anything you have coming up?
Oh, Well, I saw one I'll go over this. All right. I saw one of your questions. 5 most common mistakes newbie runners typically make, or 4 mistakes that ruin consistency. So let's finish with that.
Yeah.
All right. So what would be mine? Not having a plan. 100% get yourself a plan. And then this can lead to drwilloconnor.com, because I have training plans, and I don't think you need like a one-on-one coach or anything like that. I think just get a plan that you can trust and is adjustable to your threshold. So like my ones, I've got a test, you do the 30-minute run test, and then there's instructions on how to set your zones, and then your threshold will just keep updating. And so it's going to be specific to you. It's not one of these generic, like how to run a sub 2 hour half. It's like, get a plan that you can trust. And so now you've at least got some accountability and some structure. Run slower on your slow runs, run slower on your slow runs. Like that's definitely, those 2 things are massive.
I didn't hear that. I feel like you have to repeat it again.
Yeah. Those are massive, massive consistency things. And what would be, so eat enough, and then take carbs on so let's assume most people are kind of doing a half marathon. Take some gels and figure out a nutrition plan for your training or racing. A lot of times I see people, they're going for a 90-minute to an hour 45 kind of workout, and they might have a real small breakfast, if no breakfast, and then they're not taking any like water or carbohydrates during the session, and it's really at a detriment to your progression as a runner. So yeah, you want to be trying to get, like, during training as a minimum 40 grams an hour. So you take 3 gels for a 90-minute like session, that's specific, not just your 90-minute aerobic run, but if you've got, say, 3 by 3K or 3 by 2 miles or whatever, it's like take some gels, make sure, really target that as a specific kind of thing. So that would be my 4. Get a plan, run slower, eat enough, and take some nutrition.
Brilliant, yeah. I can go a long way with the sticks to go along. Thanks very much, Will, for all your time and all your tips, and we'll hear from you again soon.
All right, no, love being on. Appreciate it.